When we look into our universe, we see order that we've begun to understand using physics. Many secular scientists believe this order confirms ideas like evolution. But let's stop and think. Why do these laws even exist? Where did they come from? Let's discover these fundamental laws and how they contradict secular origins scenarios for the cosmos. Not only the Big Bang model, but any model that denies a creator. Coming up on today's edition of Origins, Physics Confirms Creation with Spike Psarris. Hello, welcome to Origins. I'm Ray Heiple. We have an interesting show for you. Today's guest, Spike Psarris, has a degree in electrical engineering and has done graduate work in physics. He was formerly an engineer in the United States military space program. He is an author and popular speaker on astronomy and related topics. Spike founded Creation Astronomy and has produced many fascinating videos defending a young Earth view as related in the Bible. Welcome to the program, Spike.
Thank you for having me, Ray.
So we're going to be talking about how physics confirms creation. What does that mean?
Well, physics, of course, is a very important branch of science. You could argue it's the most fundamental one, really. It describes how the universe works, and then other sciences focus on individual aspects of how that manifests itself. And so in this presentation, I'm arguing that we can use physics to confirm that there's a supernatural creator responsible for the existence of the universe.
Well, we love to hear that on this program because that's what we're all about here. How the world, how science, how knowledge, how everything that we can see and know really does confirm, back up, shows that the Bible is true. And so let's get started.
Sure, great. So I think this area is actually a little underrepresented when people talk about origins and such. A lot of us are familiar with the verse that says the heavens declare the glory of God. So that tells us that astronomy, at least, should declare some of God's glory and help us to appreciate more of His handiwork. Now, the Bible doesn't address other sciences in this light, but I think it's reasonable to assume that this same principle can be applied elsewhere. For example, we can look at biology and the incredible complexity of life and biochemistry, genetics, how all of that works, and appreciate the brilliance, if you will, of God as an engineer, so to speak. So biology tells us of God's work as an engineer. Zoology, in some respects, tells us more about God's abilities as an artist. We see these beautiful creatures, iridescence and feathers, all these amazing features in animals. We can appreciate God's glory in that way. Paleontology shows us a record of previous creatures that have lived on the planet and some of their amazing diversity and some of these amazing creatures that we see. Geology shows us a record of, in some respects, God's interaction with mankind, the record of a global flood and God's judgment. So all these different areas of science reveal different aspects of God's character and His relationship to us. But what about physics? This is an area that's not often spoken about. Is it possible to appreciate God as creator through the study of physics? And I'm saying here today that we can. And our general theme here is that the laws that describe the operation of the universe also show that the universe had a creator. I mean, physics is a very practical science, of course. It tells us how everything works. But we can go beyond that and say that the way that the universe works also tells us that the universe had to be formed by God. So what laws are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about two specific ones here today. The first is called the conservation of mass energy. And this is that the combined amount of matter and energy in the universe cannot change. And we'll talk more about this in a moment. The second is called the second law of thermodynamics, and a lot of people have heard of this one. Now, some people would summarize this as saying that entropy in a closed system will always increase. And without going into details about what exactly entropy is, there's a lot of different manifestations of that, and we'll be talking about some of those here shortly. So those two laws are going to be our focus here, and we're going to apply them to the origin of the universe and see what we can glean from this.
And Spike, when we say laws, we're not talking about like a hypothesis or a theory. We're talking about an established scientific principle that has shown itself to be.
For hundreds of years, absolutely.
Good.
And I'm going to argue that when you look at these laws in the light of origins, it presents secular scientists with something I call the secular dilemma. So what do I mean by that? Well, secular in this context means that these scientists are attempting to explain the universe's existence and how it got here without a creator. So a secular view is one that denies, if you will, the existence of a creator, or at least says that there's not a relevance to that, that claim. Dilemma is a choice between equally unfavorable alternatives. So a secular dilemma, therefore, is a dilemma being presented to secular scientists where it turns out, as we're going to see, every secular model of origins, every model of origins that you can come up with without a creator, must violate a law of physics in one way or the other.
I think that's very important because, you know, that's really what we're talking about with science, that the observations that we can see and we can test and we can repeat, you know, the scientific method, well, it proves there's no God. We hear that all the time. The theory of evolution,
right.
The Big Bang proves there's no God. But you're saying that if we actually look at what the science of physics in particular says, that it proves there had to be a God, or that there couldn't have been a no-God system.
Sure. I mean, physics tends to focus merely on how things work. But I'm saying further, if we apply it to origins, what are the implications therefore? Okay, so why don't I go up to the screen and we'll talk about this a little more in detail. So what is the conservation of mass energy? Well, the combined amount of matter, of physical stuff, and energy in the universe is constant. It never changes. So for example, if you burn a piece of wood, the wood goes away. Is that matter lost? Does it disappear? Well, no, you're converting it to energy. So a little bit of it remains as smoke and particulates, but most of it is converted into energy. So we're not losing mass, we're converting mass into energy. So physics now has a principle called the equivalence of matter and energy, where it's understood that they're different sides of the same coin, if you will. You might be familiar with the equation E equals mc squared. E represents energy, m represents mass, the amount of stuff you have, and c is the speed of light, which is a very large number. So this equation tells us that a little bit of stuff is the equivalent of a very large amount of energy, and we can convert them back and forth. But converting one or the other is not changing the total amount. The total matter and energy in the universe is conserved. It never changes.
So whether it's matter or energy, you're going back and forth, but the total amount is what you're saying.
Is constant.
That's the constant
Never
thing.
changes.
Okay.
So what do I mean by convert back and forth? Well, how do you change matter into energy? I mean, the most efficient way we know how to do that is a nuclear explosion. A little bit of stuff converts into a lot of energy. We can go the opposite direction too and convert a lot of energy into a little bit of stuff. And we do that in particle accelerators. We get little chunks of matter zipping around at close to the speed of light and smash them together. More matter comes out of the collisions than went in. And I'm not talking about just the number of particles, the amount of physical matter. But we're not creating matter from nothing. We're converting their energy of motion, their kinetic energy, into matter. So we can convert matter to energy and we convert energy to matter, but my point is we're not creating either one from nothing. You need to have the other thing first in order to get it. But the point is you can't create either one from nothing because that violates this law of physics. And we see this principle in our lives every day. I mean, if you think about this, why do we need to eat food every day? Regardless of how difficult that process might otherwise be, because our bodies need energy to operate. Can't get it from nothing because that violates physics. So we need to get it from the chemical energy stored in the food. Of course, you have to get it in our mouths first, but that's a different question.
It's making me hungry.
Sure. Why do we get a bill from the power company every month? Because our appliances need energy to operate, can't get it from nothing because that will violate physics, so you have to get it from the utility, which also can't get it from nothing because that will violate physics. So it has to get it from other sources like the chemical energy stored in coal, or the gravitational potential energy in flowing water, or solar energy from the sun. And the sun can't get it from nothing either because that would violate physics. It has to get it by burning fuel and producing energy and so on. So the point is, this principle is throughout our daily lives. You can't get matter or energy from nothing. You have to have something pre-existing as the source first. In fact, we couldn't be having this presentation today if it weren't for this law of physics, because some of the principles of circuit design are based on this law. So without making too much of an emphasis of the point, this is a very fundamental idea in physics. As one of my textbooks says, conservation laws are the guiding principles of physics. These are absolute conservation laws. They are always obeyed. But when you ask the question, then where did our universe come from? You will hear some people say it came from nothing, whether in a Big Bang or some other secular ideas. Well, if you're going to say that, you're violating this law of physics on the largest possible scale. I mean, if you take a physics class and you solve a homework problem or a quiz problem in a way that violates this law, it's going to be wrong. That's how fundamental this law is. But yet, any model that proposes that the universe came from nothing is, if you think about it, a direct violation of this principle. So we see then everything could not have come from nothing because you can't get anything from nothing. So this principle in physics, therefore, tells us that this entire category of secular models of having something come from nothing is not allowed by physics.
So they have to start in some way with everything already being there, is what we're saying.
With something. Maybe not in its current form, but yes. You can't get something from nothing. So that's what the conservation of mass energy tells us. If the combined amount of matter and energy can never change, that means you can never get anything out of nothing, because that would change the amount, right? So that's the first law we'll be talking about. The other law we'll be talking about is known as the second law of thermodynamics. And again, it says entropy in a closed system will always increase. Well, there's a lot of implications of that in our daily lives too. For example, one of the implications is hot things will cool off. Now, that's not an especially brilliant insight, right? We're all familiar with that. But if you think about it, this allows you to do some unusual approaches, perhaps. Like if you walk into a room and you see a hot cup of coffee on the table, you can use it as a crude form of clock. If the coffee is still hot, has it been there a long time or a short time?
It couldn't have been there very long.
Why not?
Because it would, like you said, it naturally cools off.
Right. So if the coffee is still hot, can it have been there forever?
No.
No, because if it had been there forever, it would have cooled off forever ago. Well, we can apply that same line of reasoning to the cosmos. Is there anything in the cosmos that hasn't cooled off yet? Stars.
Thankfully.
Our sun,
we'd be
right?
in trouble, right?
Sure. So if the universe contains stars that will cool off or explode or otherwise go away eventually, can the universe be eternally old?
No, it should have already happened.
Right. If the universe were eternally old, stars would have all been gone eternally long ago. So the fact that stars are still there tells us that the universe is not eternally old. So what about the idea then that stars can form to replace the old ones? There's issues with that, but setting those issues aside, there's still a limited amount of energy available for that. So that too would have been consumed eternally long ago if the universe were eternally old. So this law of physics, therefore, tells us the universe can't be eternally old, because if it were eternally old, we wouldn't see stars anymore, but we still do. And as a brief side point, by the way, there are Christians who tell us that we need to accept the Big Bang model because it shows that there was a beginning to the universe. We don't need the Big Bang model to show that there's a beginning to the universe, right? Because if the universe isn't eternally old, then it must have had a beginning at some point. So if you want to confirm that the universe had a beginning, you don't need the Big Bang model, just walk outside and look up.
Sounds like physics itself says there had to be a beginning.
Physics itself says, and the fact that we walk outside, if you see the sun during the day or stars at night, that tells us the universe is not eternally old.
Because they're still there.
Because they're still there, which means it must have had a beginning. So that's the second law that I wanted to discuss today. Now, let's apply these to the question of origin specifically and show how they present a secular dilemma.
Spike, I'm going to have to stop you right there. We have to take a break. Stay with us. We'll be right back after these messages.
We hope you're enjoying Origins TV. It all started at Cornerstone Television in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We've been producing new episodes for over 37 years now. We praise God for the success of the program and are excited to introduce you to Origins and to us. If you're interested in watching more episodes of Origins, you can find them on our YouTube page. Simply go to YouTube and search Cornerstone Television Network. Click the like and subscribe buttons, then you'll find the best episodes of Origins in our playlist. You can also visit our website at ctvn.org/origins. One more way you can stay connected with us is to subscribe to our free monthly Hope Today newsletter, which you can do from our website. And if you have any questions, call us here at Cornerstone Television at 888-665-4483. We'd love to connect with you. Thank you for watching.
Welcome back to Origins. We're talking to Spike Psarris, who's been sharing about how physics confirms creation. Spike, it seems like we had left the program by showing that science itself demands, or the laws of physics demand, that the universe has a beginning. Is that accurate?
Yes, we've talked about two laws of physics to this point. The first one, conservation of mass energy, shows us that something can't come from nothing. The second one, the second law of thermodynamics, tells us that the universe can't be eternally old. So what we haven't done yet is combine those to show how it puts the secular scientist on the horns of a dilemma when he's trying to build a model for how the universe got here without a creator.
Well, let's go ahead and get them in that dilemma.
Sure. So as I mentioned, I like to call this the secular dilemma, and it's based really on a simple question, just 6 words long. Did the universe have a beginning? Now, how many possible answers are there to that question?
I would think 2.
Just 2 answers, right? Yes or no. So either yes, there was a beginning, or no, there was not a beginning, which means the universe has always been there in some form or another, or in other words, the universe would be eternal. So if you're a secular scientist trying to deny God as the originator of the universe, those are only 2 options. You have to say yes or no to this question. So now let's apply those laws of physics that we discussed to these answers and see what they tell us. So if someone wants to say, yes, there was a beginning to the universe, then what would that imply? Well, if the universe is everything, that's what the word means, right? So if everything had a beginning, what was there before that beginning?
Not everything, which would be nothing.
Nothing. Because if there was something before the beginning, then whatever began wasn't everything.
Yes.
Okay, so if the universe had a beginning, then before the universe there had to have been nothing. So I actually have a graphic here of what the universe would have looked like at that point. So this is just nothing.
Nothing. Oh, there it is.
Although,
Wait,
yeah,
the arrows,
granted,
there it is. I see
it's just an artist's conception, so I took some liberties
I guess
here.
if I see it, then I'm seeing something.
Right.
So I'm not seeing it.
Exactly.
It would be better, yeah.
So if there was nothing, and then later there was something, which is everything, the universe, is that a workable proposal? Can nothing make everything?
You know, just from what you said, and I'm far from being a physicist, that can't be possible because, as you said, you have to have matter and energy, and if you have it, then it had to come from somewhere.
Right.
So it couldn't have come from nothing. Like
right.
My coffee's
nothing,
not getting cold
exactly.
because of nothing.
Right. Because nothing can't make everything. Because nothing can create nothing. Nothing can do nothing. From nothing comes nothing, right?
I have to say this, and I don't know if this is going to make the edit, but I had a theologian teacher who said, nothing is what sleeping rocks dream about.
Okay. I don't know how to respond to that. So from nothing comes nothing. Dr. R.C. Sproul once said that if there was ever once truly nothing, there could never be anything.
Yes, if there was nothing, then there would be nothing now.
Exactly.
We wouldn't have a dilemma then.
And as Dr. Phil Fernandez once said, you can't tell me that nothing made everything. I know too much about nothing. So this tells us then something could not have come from nothing. And we saw that from this law of physics that we discussed, right? So back to our dilemma then, if you want to answer yes to this question, well, then you're violating a law of physics, the conservation of mass energy as we discussed.
It would seem like the secularist has to say the universe has always been there, right?
Right. That's the only other option, is that no, the universe must be eternal. But is that allowed by physics? Well, we discussed really that the universe can't be eternal due to the second law of thermodynamics, which we talked about. Because if the universe were eternally old, we wouldn't see stars anymore, and we do.
So this is when we're actually taking this law and applying it to what is, right? I mean, given the universe as it is, it can't be eternal.
Correct.
Is that fair to say?
Correct. So back to the dilemma then, we already saw that yes doesn't work. Now we see that no doesn't work either. Yes and no both violate physics, albeit in different ways.
So if you're a secular scientist, I'd say you have a problem here.
You have a problem because you have to pick one option, but they're both going to violate physics. So applying these two laws of physics tell us that atheistic cosmogonies, cosmogony means history of the cosmos, any model of origins for the cosmos from an atheistic perspective is not allowed by physics. Whether you say yes or no to that question, you're going to violate physics in one way or the other.
And this is where, as a Christian, our concept of a transcendent God, right? I mean, if our God was part of the universe, we would be in this dilemma too, because God either, couldn't create himself or he had to always be here, but then that would violate what we see. And so our God isn't part of the universe, right? He stands outside of it.
Yes, true. God is transcendent, and so he is not part of this dilemma. The atheist, however, is stuck with this dilemma. And if you think about it, the atheist doesn't get to make a cosmogony, a history of the cosmos, that's consistent with physics. His only option is to pick which law of physics he wants to violate with this model, which I think is interesting.
And I know the common one that I hear, the Big Bang, which we haven't looked at specifically, is that what matter and energy come from this point of singularity, which sort of is there and isn't there and sort of is eternal, and then it explodes and everything is produced. But they're really trying to dance between the yes and the no there, right? I mean, in a way they're saying it's eternal because the singularity was always there, but then in a way they're saying it's a beginning because this thing blew up. And really, when we get to look at what that is, I mean, okay, which one is it? Did it have a beginning or is it eternal?
Yeah, and you raise an excellent point. There are several objections to this from the secular community, objections to the dilemma that I just raised. And we won't take the time to go into each of these, but yes, in one way or the other, they're all trying to evade the implications of this. I mean, some atheists are saying that nothing isn't really nothing, there was really something before the Big Bang, but then that just flips you back to the no answer instead of the yes, you have the same problem. Others will try to say that the Big Bang didn't really create anything because the universe has positive and negative energy, it cancels itself out. There's issues with that explanation, not the least of which is that the universe doesn't do that by itself. You don't get positive and negative energy springing out of nothing without some external cause. Others will say we live in an oscillating universe where there's a cycle of Big Bang, Big Crunch, Big Bang, Big Crunch.
Expansion and then the...
Right.
Yeah.
But that runs into problems with thermodynamics. Just like you can't drop a basketball and have it bounce forever, you can't have a universe rebounding like this forever too. Physics doesn't allow for that.
And of course, on the movies we watch the multiverse. We haven't even talked about that.
We'll do a whole program on that. A very interesting topic, by the way. So that's the secular dilemma then. Again, a simple question. Did the universe have a beginning? Yes means you violate physics in one way. No means you violate it in another way. The third option, as you mentioned, is that there's a supernatural creator transcendent to the universe, outside of the universe. This is the only explanation that doesn't violate physics. Because if you think about it, the universe exists. There's only three possible ways to explain that. Either it was formed by a creator, or it formed without a creator, or it never formed because it's always existed. We've talked about how it can't have formed without a creator because that violates one law of physics. It can't have always existed because that violates the second one. So the only logical explanation then is that it was formed by a creator.
And so we're avoiding some of those dilemmas. Well, we are avoiding the dilemma. On the one hand, we're saying there is something that's always there. Everything didn't come from nothing. God didn't come from nothing.
Right.
He's always been there. But on the other hand, we're not saying that matter and energy and that the universe has always been there. It was created by God. So in a sense, as a Christian, we get to have both. We get the eternal God, and then we get the creation having a beginning. And that doesn't violate any of the laws of physics, does it?
Right. We get to be consistent with physics, whereas the secular scientist does not. So that's the secular dilemma. Not only is this a matter of physics, though. I like to look at this, and the Bible doesn't say this specifically, but this is the way I look at it. I view this as evidence of God's grace. God could have created the universe in such a way that it looked, or at least could be explained, by secular origins models of some sort or another. Now, he had the right to do that, and he could have just said, trust me, I made this, don't accept that interpretation. But how many of us would struggle if the universe appeared to have evolved over billions of years by natural processes, if there was a valid seeming explanation for that?
That's a great point, that God in his goodness allows us with our knowledge to see that he has to be there. He's the only way we can rationally account for this. And he could have made mathematics or whatever, the way things work, that we would never be able to get to that point.
Right. But God in his grace has placed us in a universe that looks created. the very laws that show us how it operates also show us that he's responsible for it. Sharing this information with believers can help them reach other people. If non-believers hear this information too, maybe they'll start to then asking questions and learn more about the Bible and science on their own or through friends or whatever. And even to help believers. It's one thing to say, yes, the Bible is true and I believe it, but I think it's a worthy endeavor to share with people the wonders of God's creation. Evidence for engineering and design from the smallest scales to the top, wondrous things in the animal kingdom, and all these things we can't fully appreciate God's glory by any stretch, but just catching glimpses of it is very exciting. There's many people who are like I used to be, where science was their stumbling block. Yeah. You know, each of us have things holding us back from the Lord before we are His. For some it's science, for some it's other things. I do what I do now to try to equip people to help people like me, like I used to be, where when science is their stumbling block, you can at least help remove that from their path, and then it's up to the Holy Spirit to do the rest.
Spike, I do too, and I really want to thank you for being on the program. This is really great stuff. I hope you'll join us again sometime.
Yes, love to.
And I hope you'll join us next time. As we saw in this program, secular scientists regularly claim that their disciplines prove that there is no God, or at least that they don't require a God to work. On today's program, we saw that the most basic laws of physics concerning the existence of the universe itself will not work unless there is a God who has created it. It just goes to show you once again that we know what the Bible says is true, and the proof, it's all around you. If you enjoy Origins, we sure could use your help to keep this Creation Television program on the air. Your support, both prayerfully and financially, make a big impact. So let's work together to reveal how awesome our Creator really and truly is. And we'll see you next time right here on Origins.
Thank you for watching this edition of Origins. For a DVD of this series, you can order online or send a $12 donation to cover shipping and handling and write to Origins Program number 2309, Cornerstone Network, Wall, Pennsylvania, 15148.
This presentation was made possible by the faithful prayers and financial support of you, our Cornerstone family.